Paris, croissants, romance, the Eiffel Tower, yeah, and almost getting into fistfights over parking spaces.
Oh, really?
Not exactly, the postcard images,
Right.
but that's kind of why we're here, right? For the real deal. So today we are diving deep into the real Paris. Not the tourist trap version, we're talking 21st century Paris. And our guide for all of this is Simon Kuper and his book, New W, Impossible City.
You know what I like about Kuper is that he's not just some fly-by-night observer. He's lived in Paris for over 20 years.
Wow.
An immigrant himself.
Oh, interesting.
So he really understands what it's like to navigate this city and all of its unique, let's call them quirks.
Quirks, yeah. That's one way to put it. He actually tells this story in the book about almost getting in a fist fight with another driver.
Oh, no.
Over a crosswalk.
Wow.
It turns out that Parisian driving has its own set of flexible rules, let's say.
That's putting it lightly, maybe. I don't know. I mean, what's fascinating about this whole, Parisian parking debacle that he describes is that it actually sort of illustrates this much deeper aspect of Parisian life, these unwritten codes that govern how everything works. Imagine a city where even addressing a waiter has its own protocol.
Right.
Social gatherings are choreographed.
Right. You're supposed to know where to stand and what to say.
It's a whole thing.
It's like everyone else got a rule book.
Yeah.
And you're left out.
Exactly.
And it's not just when do you air kiss or how do you order a coffee. Kuper gets into the really granular stuff. Dinner party etiquette. How to deal with your neighbors.
Ooh.
Or not deal with them, as the case may be.
Right.
And, that constant dance of social status that seems to be always going on. I don't know if you remember this, but there was that story about Kuper's neighbor.
Yes.
Monsieur Vieux.
Monsieur Vieux. This guy, oh my goodness.
This guy's got a whole spy ring going on in the building.
Years of standoffs. Years of these icy standoffs with Kuper over some perceived slight from years ago. It took a very specific peace offering to even get on speaking terms. A bottle of port, as I recall.
Oh, that's right.
And even that was just a very, very temporary truce.
Right. Wow.
The whole saga with Monsieur Vieux really highlights how deeply ingrained these social codes are in Paris. They can feel impenetrable.
Yeah, especially for an outsider.
Exactly.
And from what Kuper's saying, a lot of it comes from this desire, I think, to preserve a certain image of Parisian identity.
Yes.
But then also this underlying current of distrust towards outsiders.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is that you said outsider. And I thought, even if you've lived in Paris for years, like Kuper, there's still a sense in which you're not really, truly Parisian, right?
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, how are these codes holding up in the face of, a rapidly changing world?
Yeah, for sure. And, while Kuper doesn't shy away from those challenges at all, he also takes us beyond, those picture-perfect arrondissements.
Right.
We're talking the places that don't always make it into the guidebooks, right? To the Parisian suburbs, the banlieues.
Yes.
And that's where his book, I think, really starts to get interesting, because he's trying to challenge those stereotypes that we often have.
Right, exactly.
About those areas. And he does it by actually going there and talking to people.
He does, and he particularly connects with this one young man, Julien, who's the son of a cafe owner.
Yes.
And through Julien, we get this whole other perspective on life in the banlieues.
Right. And it's through Julien's story that we start to see this whole other side of Paris.
Yeah.
A side that's rarely shown in those glossy travel magazines.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. I think what's so powerful about Julien's story is that it sort of shows this whole tapestry of contradictions, you know what I mean? That make up the banlieue. So on the one hand, you have these vibrant, diverse communities that are just full of energy and potential. But then on the other hand, there are these really deep-seated social and economic inequalities that are, really a legacy of years of underinvestment and neglect.
Yeah, it's like Kuper saying, look, these aren't just these faceless suburbs, right? These are microcosms of much larger social forces that are at play. And it's really interesting because for Julien, this is personal, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because he talks about this pull that he feels back to his uncle's cafe.
Right.
And it represents his roots, his family history.
And I think that's one of the things that makes Kuper's writing so compelling, is that he is able to connect these larger social and historical forces to the intimate experiences of individuals.
Right.
Like Julien's internal struggle with this sort of feeling of both belonging and estrangement, right?
Yeah.
It kind of speaks to that larger narrative of the banlieues.
Absolutely. It's like when you go back to a place that you remember from your childhood.
Yes.
And you're trying to reconcile that with what it is now.
Exactly.
It's two different versions of the same place.
Right.
And speaking of change, Kuper doesn't shy away from the tougher aspects of Paris's history. He takes us right into those terrorist attacks that shook the city.
And this is where I think Kuper's unique perspective as both an insider and an outsider becomes so crucial, because he doesn't just report on the events as an outsider might.
Right.
He actually helps us understand, I think, the social and political climate that fueled these attacks.
Yeah.
The complexities of integration, the fear, the anger, all of that.
Yeah, he talks about walking through his own neighborhood
Right.
after the attacks and seeing the fear in people's eyes.
Yeah.
And I think that really stuck with him because he felt this urge, I think, to understand,
Yeah.
to try to bridge this gap between these communities.
It would have been very easy, I think, to end the book on that sort of somber note, but Kuper doesn't let us succumb to despair.
Right.
Instead he shifts our attention to this incredible resilience of Paris and its capacity for reinvention and hope.
Well, and one of the examples of that is this rise of cycling culture in Paris, which I never would picture.
I know, it's amazing. It's a complete transformation.
You're telling me those traffic-filled roundabouts are now full of bicycles?
Streets once dominated by cars, right? Now they're full of bike lanes, sidewalk cafes are spilling out onto these newly pedestrianized squares. It's incredible.
Wow.
Paris is really actively shedding this kind of car-centric identity and in embracing something much more sustainable
Yeah.
and people-centered. I mean, it's a trend that we're seeing in major cities all over the world, but Paris is really taking it to heart.
Yeah. It sounds like they're really trying to, reclaim their city,
Yeah.
one bike lane at a time.
Exactly.
And this whole Grand Paris project that Kuper talks about, that's another piece of this, right?
Yes.
This whole plan to connect the city with its suburbs.
It's huge because for years there was this disconnect, right, between Paris proper and the surrounding banlieues. But this Grand Paris project represents a huge, I think, shift in thinking.
Yeah.
Because it's about acknowledging the interconnectedness of all these different areas and investing in better transportation, creating more affordable housing, fostering a greater sense of unity.
Yeah, it's like they're finally kind of breaking down those invisible walls, right, that we were talking about earlier. And acknowledging that the banlieues are just as much a part of Paris as the Eiffel Tower or the Louvre.
Exactly. And it's about time, right?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it.
And, speaking of challenging perceptions, we can't forget about how Paris is tackling another really important issue, and that's social justice, especially in the wake of the #MeToo movement.
It's almost like Paris is having this, citywide soul-searching moment,
Yeah.
confronting its past, trying to be more inclusive, more equitable.
Right.
And speaking of which, Kuper brings up something I thought was really interesting. He talks about the 2024 Olympics
Oh, yeah.
and how these games are about so much more than just, sports.
Absolutely. I mean, hosting the Olympics is a chance for any city to sort of showcase itself to the world.
Right.
And in Paris's case, they're really using it as an opportunity to challenge perceptions and kind of reshape their global image.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. How much of the infrastructure for these games is actually in Seine-Saint-Denis?
Right.
Which is a department that's often associated with, those negative stereotypes about the banlieues that we were talking about.
Exactly.
It's a big deal.
And Kuper takes us on this whole walk through the Olympic Village there, and it sounds amazing. State-of-the-art facilities, sustainable design,
It's incredible.
all nestled right in the heart of this community that's often overlooked.
And I think that's a really powerful statement. And it goes beyond just the physical structures themselves, right?
Right.
Think about the investment in the area, the jobs created,
Yeah.
the exposure for local businesses.
Yeah.
The Olympics are really acting as this catalyst for change,
Wow.
driving social and economic development in a way that benefits, everyone, not just those in the city center.
Yeah, it's like they're rewriting the narrative of the banlieues right in front of the whole world.
Exactly.
And while we're on the topic of Paris on the world stage, Kuper reminds us that this city has always been this hub for international sport. I mean, the modern Olympics started there.
It did.
I mean, come on.
Paris has this long, rich history of being a place where the world comes together to, not just to compete, but to share ideas, to kind of push boundaries.
Yeah.
And this spirit of innovation, I think, is really woven into the fabric of the city.
Right.
So in a way, these Olympics are just another chapter in that story, but with this renewed focus on, inclusivity and sustainability.
It's like Paris is taking all these pieces of its identity,
Yeah.
the history, the challenges, the hopes, and sort of weaving them together into something new.
Exactly.
And it kind of makes you think about your own legacy,
Yeah.
What mark do we want to leave on the world? And actually, speaking of legacy, Kuper ends the book on this really poignant note.
Mm.
He talks about visiting his wife's old apartment in New York
Oh, wow.
and seeing her name still on the doorbell.
Oh.
And it just, I don't know, it struck me because it's this reminder of like the paths not taken,
Yeah.
the choices that we make and
Yeah.
how they kind of shape our lives. But also even in a city like as ever-changing as Paris, there are these traces of the past, right?
Right.
These echoes of who we once were.
It makes you realize that Paris, it's more than just like a collection of beautiful buildings or, famous landmarks.
Right.
It's this living, breathing organism that's sort of shaped by, millions of stories that have unfolded within its streets.
And that's what I think makes this book so interesting. He captures that.
He does.
He captures the essence of Paris, the beauty, the contradictions, the resilience. And I think in doing so, he reminds us that cities, like people, are constantly evolving, learning,
growing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So as you go about your day, think about the places you call home.
Yeah.
What are their hidden codes? What are the stories that they tell? What role do you play in shaping their future?
Those are great questions.
It's something to ponder, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. This deep dive may have been about Paris, but I think the themes that Kuper really explores, they resonate far beyond the city limits.
For sure.
It's a reminder that, the world is full of complexities and contradictions, but also endless possibilities
Yeah.
for change.
Yeah,
And that, I think, is a pretty inspiring thought to leave you with.
it is. Well, thank you so much for taking this deep dive with me. It's been a pleasure.
It's been great.